Well, welcome back to this is week 8 of the Bible study of the Gospel of John. If you are new with us today, I encourage you to go back and experience the other Bible studies before this point. This will help you get a better context of where we are today. But just a reminder, the Gospel of John is really written in order to emphasize the divinity of Christ. This is different than the other 3 Gospels. About 90% of it is unique. And so we see within the pages of these gospel accounts, particularly these things that we call the I am statements, where Jesus attaches himself to God the Father through the word I am. And that I am comes from the word Yahweh, which we call God from Exodus chapter 3 and Moses in the burning bush. And Jesus attaches himself to Yahweh, I am, and then makes these statements. And so today we are looking at actually 2 I am statements, which are found within John chapter 10. But right before this point in John chapter 9, which we did not study, but I encourage you to read, Jesus is really talking with the disciples and the Pharisees, really both, about how the world that we are in is often in spiritual blindness, not able to see, that even though we are walking through life and we are experiencing life, we are not paying attention really to what's going on in this life, to the creator of this life and the sustainer of our life. And so he then goes into this story in John chapter 10. Here is what he says. He says, "Very truly, I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought all of his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers." Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. And so again, Jesus said to them, "Verily, truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, who is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. The hired hand runs away because a hired hand does not care for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. For there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again. I have received this command from my Father." You see, his disciples, those that he was speaking to, the people of this age, there was a lot of competing voices vying for their attention. Jesus wasn't the only one that came around and said, "I'm the Messiah. I'm who you've been waiting for." In fact, Jesus was one voice among many voices. And these disciples and these people were getting very, very confused. And so Jesus made these statements and told them, basically, I am the only voice. Now remember, back in Jesus' day, shepherding was not considered a very noble profession. This is strange for most of us to think of, because when we think of the shepherds, we think of Christmas time, and we think of hailing these shepherds as these beautiful people sitting on a hilltop in nice, beautiful pastures, just waiting for the announcement of the birth of Jesus. We think of gentle souls sitting on hillsides. But this profession was not like that at all. In fact, this profession invited wanderers, and people that were shepherds were generally people without roots. They were nomadic. They did not have family ties. A lot of them were thieves. They were exploiters. And so they were sent outside of the community. This was one of the jobs that they could do. And so shepherds would wander along these hillsides, grazing the sheep from place to place. But these shepherds did not own these sheep. These sheep were not usually their property. They were hired by someone else. They were hired hands taking care of someone else's property that didn't want to do this work. And so we all know, even in our own lives, that when we are borrowing something from someone, We don't treat it quite the same way as if we owned it. I think about this when we go to hotels or we go to Airbnbs, and we sometimes trash those hotels and Airbnbs, things that we would never do on our own home because it doesn't belong to us. And so the same was true for these hired shepherds in Jesus' day. Well, at night, it was common to herd sheep into what was known as stone corrals. So if you can picture it, it was these stones that were stones stacked upon stones, probably about 6 to 8 feet high, and they would have in a circle, often in a circle, and they would have an opening at the front to move the sheep in. And these shepherds would lay their body over that stone opening to protect the sheep, particularly at night, so the sheep wouldn't wander off, and so animals couldn't get into the sheep pen while they slept. And so no one, that means, could go into the sheep pen without going through this opening, or what we might call the gate. And so in verse 7 in this chapter, Jesus calls himself, very truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. He calls himself the gate. He calls himself the one that is the protector and the deliverance, really, for these sheep, or these people in his sense, because he's using a metaphor here, that are in the sheepfold. But he doesn't just call himself the gate. He doesn't just call himself the protector. He also goes on to call himself, in verse 11, the good shepherd. He calls himself the shepherd as well. A good shepherd, actually. Not just a shepherd that's a hired hand that will run off at the first sign of danger, but he calls himself the owner of the sheep. Now, a true shepherd, a true owner, really does 3 things for his sheep. He dies for his sheep. That's what we learn in verse 11. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. Why would a shepherd die for his sheep? Well, that's what he does when he lays himself down at the door, because if someone comes to attack the sheep, like the wolf, they'd have to get through him first. And this was important, that they would lay down their lives, because these sheep were their livelihood. They were their property. They were their future. And so without protecting the property or those particular sheep, they have no future, no inheritance for someone in the next generation. And so he calls himself a good shepherd, one that would lay down his life for his sheep. And then it also tells us that a true owner does another thing. He knows his sheep. Verse 14, it says that. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. He knows that those that belong to him, they are intimate with one another. I mean, this shepherd spends all of his time with these sheep, trying to protect them, trying to move them around from place to place safely. He is protecting them from other flocks, and he doesn't recognize those sheep in those flocks. Even he knows when one of his sheep is hurting or sick or missing. They're his responsibility. He doesn't know the sheep in these other flocks. And finally, he says to them that another thing a true owner does is he brings other sheep into his flock. I find this the most interesting part of this particular chapter, because he says in verse 16, I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. Jesus acknowledges in this passage that he isn't just the gate and the shepherd for the current flock of sheep, which is the Jewish people, but that Jesus has other flocks, other places. And there's a reference here to people like us, or most of us, these Gentiles that live in other places and spaces that he has already chosen ownership over. And his job is to bring those sheep from all of these other flocks together, and to create a larger flock, because he knows those sheep as well. And so right here we have Jesus extending the message of salvation and being inclusive, not exclusive, but inclusive to another flock that already belonged to him. He extends the boundaries of his protection, and he extends the boundaries of God's protection. So what do we learn from this? Jesus protects, and he knows, and he loves those who belong to him. How do you know if you belong to Jesus? How do you know if you are part of the sheepfold of God? Well, he says it very clearly here in verse 4 of this chapter. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. How do you know if you're part of the sheepfold of God? You know and hear and listen and obey the voice of God. I find this interesting because the sheepfold here is not distinguished by their moral behavior. They are not distinguished by their ethics. They're not distinguished by their bloodline, by their sheepness. They are not distinguished in this passage by correct theology. They are not distinguished by anything except that they know and obey the voice of God. How do you know if you know or have heard the voice of God? How does God know? Because you follow him. And so Jesus, as he's speaking to this crowd who is hearing lots of voices clamoring for their attention, lots of people saying that they are the Messiah or they are the way or God is teaching this or God is speaking me to this, Jesus is saying to them, pay attention. Pay attention. Listen closely to what God is speaking. Apply what you are hearing and follow. It seems that Jesus here is establishing himself as the only voice, the rightful voice in the midst of all of these other voices that are speaking to the Jewish people. And he establishes himself as that same rightful voice today. You may think they are getting in other voices, but they are really liars and not to be trusted and leading people astray. But there are 1,000 voices clamoring for our attention. And Jesus says, just listen. Just pause. Just be still and trust the voice of God. I am the gate. I will protect you. I will deliver you. I will lay down my life for you. And I am the good shepherd. I will lead you because you are mine. So what is God speaking in your life right now? How do you know that it's the voice of God? Or is your world so loud that you can even hear God's voice? Are you following the voice that you hear? I invite you now to pause this and look at the reflection questions, whether that's taking place in a group or whether that's taking place individually, and think about that in your life right now.
Knowing God's voice and being able to distinguish God's voice in our noisy culture today was at the heart of our scripture for this week. So our application for this week is going to provide us an opportunity to learn how to be more present to God and to hear from God. So we are going to experience centering prayer together. And some of you may be familiar with this, or maybe it's a practice that you already have in place in your life. But for those of us who have not done it before, centering prayer is a contemplative practice. And it really just emerges from a desire to be with God and to focus our attention solely on God's presence with us. So how we're going to do that is this. First, find 20 minutes that you can have that's uninterrupted. Now, you may want to bring your phone with you or some other sort of alarm so that you don't have to be looking at the clock as you're in this prayer time. And then find a peaceful space. And once you do that, choose a sacred word that you could use throughout this practice, as we'll come back to it throughout our prayer time together. And then just sit comfortably and close your eyes. And then once your eyes are closed, just gently bring to mind the word, your sacred word, and be present to it. Be present to God. And as thoughts or distractions arise, allow those thoughts to pass and then just gently call to mind that sacred word that you've identified. And then just remain in the state of openness to God until your alarm draws you from prayer. And then just simply thank God for the time that you've spent together. Let your mind, body, and spirit reacclimate to your surroundings. And I do pray that this practice, that God met you in it, that you just enjoyed being in God's presence. And if you found this as a fruitful practice or something that you feel like God might be calling you into, I do invite you to do this on a more regular basis. So I just pray that we can each have open hearts and peaceful minds this week as we engage in this. God bless.